The sound of sizzling ribs filled the air as Julian Carter eased into his lounge chair beside the pool, a cold beer in hand and Miles Davis whispering through the speakers hidden beneath his imported palm trees. To him, this was perfection, an ordinary Saturday in South Florida, made extraordinary by a combination of grilled meat, smooth jazz, and blessed solitude. Julian was 42, a self-described introvert and senior software engineer who had earned his slice of paradise through years of late nights, debugging sessions, and corporate nonsense. His backyard, encased in a 6-foot privacy fence with weathered wood and dense foliage, was his haven. The yard was meticulous, trimmed grass, potted succulents, and an in-ground pool that glistened under the Florida sun like a sapphire. It wasn't just a backyard. It was therapy. The day had been going perfectly until it wasn't. Julian had just cracked open his second Corona Light, his shirt damp with sweat after mowing the lawn in the relentless humidity, when the unmistakable creak of the back gate interrupted the rhythm of his piece. He turned his head slowly, squinting into the sun, half expecting to see a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor's curious dog. What he saw instead was the unmistakable silhouette of Margaret Kellerman. The name might not ring a bell for outsiders, but within the notorious Harmony Pines Homeowners Association, she was infamous. Margaret was the self-appointed enforcer of HOA bylaws, the president of the Architectural Integrity Committee, and the kind of woman who ironed her lawn chair covers. Today, she wore an ivory linen suit that glowed against the greenery, her signature string of pearls resting heavily on her neck like a badge of honor. Her oversized sunglasses made her eyes unreadable, but the tension in her jaw said plenty. "Julian," she said crisply, like she was reading from a script. "We need to talk. About the alcohol." Julian blinked. "Margaret, are you trespassing?" "I'm conducting an official HOA inspection," she replied, stepping further into his yard without invitation. "And I see you're drinking beer." He looked at the bottle in his hand, then at her. "Yes, Margaret, I am. In my own backyard. On a Saturday. The HOA bylaws strictly prohibit public consumption of alcohol." Julian set the bottle down slowly. "This isn't public. It's my backyard. Unless I missed the memo about it becoming a public park overnight." "The spirit of the bylaws," she countered, puffing up with righteous indignation, "is to maintain a family-friendly environment. Alcohol promotes undesirable behavior." She cast a suspicious glance around, as though she expected to find a college fraternity riot behind his poolside speaker. "Margaret," he said calmly, "I'm alone, listening to jazz, drinking a light beer. I'm not exactly leading a spring break parade." "I'm going to have to ask you to pour that out immediately," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger with a nail so aggressively pink it nearly glowed. Julian stared at her. "You're serious?" She didn't blink, and that's when something shifted inside him. Not anger, not really. Just a tired, weary resolve. He took a long sip from his beer, keeping his gaze fixed on her, then placed the bottle down with a gentle thud on the wrought iron table beside him. "You know," he said evenly, gesturing toward a nearby motion-activated camera, "I've been upgrading my security system lately." Her head jerked to follow his motion. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. "It means," he replied, "this entire conversation is being recorded. Video and audio." Margaret's face froze, then flushed an alarming shade of crimson. "You think you're so clever, Julian," she spat. "You think the rules don't apply to you because you work in tech. You're a menace to this community." Her voice had risen to a shriek. "You're a danger to children. You should be locked up." She fumbled for her phone, waving it in the air like it was a holy artifact. "I'm calling the police. I'm reporting a public disturbance. I'm reporting alcohol-related terrorism." Julian's jaw dropped. He genuinely didn't know whether to laugh or cry. 10 minutes later, the distant wail of sirens answered her hysterics. A police cruiser pulled into his driveway, lights flashing. 2 officers, a young woman with a notepad and an older man with a silver mustache, approached the backyard cautiously. Margaret met them at the gate like a dramatic reenactment of a Lifetime movie, arms flailing, recounting her tale of domestic terror involving jazz, a beer, and the collapse of Western civilization. Julian calmly walked over and played them the footage. Every painful second. They watched as Margaret trespassed, made false accusations, and spun up a tale of chaos from the most peaceful backyard in town. The younger officer smirked. The older one sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and asked Margaret to wait by the driveway. Julian wasn't arrested. He wasn't cited. In fact, the officers apologized to him for the inconvenience. Margaret, however, was issued a citation for trespassing and for filing a false police report. Her face as the officer handed her the notice was, in Julian's mind, suitable for framing. But he wasn't done. The following Monday, he attended the HOA meeting. He brought a USB drive. He dressed in business casual. He waited his turn. And when he spoke, he did so calmly and professionally, playing the footage on the community projector for the whole board to see. There was an audible gasp when Margaret yelled, "Alcohol-related terrorism." A week later, the HOA board stripped Margaret of her position and fined her the maximum allowed under their charter. Julian celebrated with ribs, Miles Davis, and another Corona Light. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. 2 days later, he found a note taped to his front door. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, and angry. "You may think you've won," it read, "but this isn't over. You've made an enemy of the Harmony Pines HOA. You will regret it." It was signed, Margaret Kellerman. Julian laughed, but only a little. Then he called a lawyer. He retained Eleanor Vance, a sharp-witted, no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for handling neighborhood disputes with surgical precision. She reviewed his case, watched the footage, and smirked. "She's a zealot," Eleanor said. "I've dealt with her kind before. Don't worry, we'll be ready." And it turned out they needed to be. Because 2 weeks later, Julian was served a lawsuit. Margaret, through her attorney Bartholomew Bart Higgins, was suing him for defamation, emotional distress, and what she termed intentional infliction of neighborhood disharmony. Yes, that was a real phrase in the complaint. Bart Higgins was the kind of lawyer who advertised on local late-night TV. Bitten by a duck? Call Bart. Julian couldn't believe he was real. Eleanor filed a motion to dismiss immediately and a counterclaim for harassment. Julian was nervous, sure, but he also felt strangely empowered. This wasn't just about beer anymore. This was about principle. 3 weeks later, the judge ruled in his favor. The lawsuit was thrown out. Bart Higgins was sanctioned for filing a frivolous suit. Margaret was ordered to pay Julian's legal fees and a fine for abuse of process. But what struck Julian wasn't the legal victory, it was seeing Margaret afterward. She passed by his house slowly one evening, no clipboard in sight, her suit rumpled, pearls askew, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She looked lost. And Julian felt something unexpected. Pity. He realized that Margaret wasn't just a power-hungry Karen. She was lonely, isolated, obsessed with control because it gave her purpose. That didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it. So he let it go. He kept grilling. He kept sipping beer. He added 2 more security cameras, just in case. And he considered, briefly, running for the HOA board himself. But ultimately, he decided against it. Peace, he figured, was the better victory. These days, Margaret avoids him. She doesn't speak. She doesn't glare. Maybe the court ruling humbled her. Maybe she found someone new to target. Either way, Julian has reclaimed his Saturdays. He leans back in his lounge chair, the ribs on the grill, Coltrane whispering from the speakers, and a cold beer in his hand. And for the first time in a long time, Harmony Pines finally lives up to its name.